Joint Committee on Tourism, Small Business, and Information Technology. I want to welcome everyone. Look forward to today's agenda. Sasha, if you would, please call the roll.
Senator Boswell, Senator Funky Frommeyer, Senator Gardler, Senator Harper Angel, Senator Howell, Senator Mills, Senator Storm, Senator Thomas, Senator Wheeler, Senator Wilson, Representative All.
Here.
Representative Baker. Here. Representative Dotson.
Here.
Representative Pfister. Representative Frazier Gordon.
Here.
Representative Freeland. Representative Fugit.
Here.
Representative Grossberg. Representative Heath.
Here.
Representative Kulkarni.
Present.
Representative Lawrence. Here. Representative Maddox. Representative Massaroni. Representative McPherson. Representative Pollock.
Here.
Representative Roberts. Representative Stalker.
Present.
Representative Tackett Lafferty. Representative Tate. Representative Timoney.
Here.
Representative Truitt.
Here.
Representative Wesley. Representative White. Representative Wilson. Representative Witten.
Here.
Co-Chair Wise.
Present.
Co-Chair King.
Present.
Co-Chair Pratt.
Perfect. We are duly constituted to be here and do business today. Do we have any members, any introductions of any guests they may have? Seeing none, let's jump right into the agenda. We'll be focusing on tourism today. I would like to welcome first up those with the Kentucky recreational use of rock climbing and proposed changes is the topic today. Those representing the Red River Gorge and the Climbers Coalition. Gentlemen, welcome. I think this may be the first time you've appeared before a committee here within the Capitol Annex. So protocol is there's a microphone in front of you. There's a button to push that turns green that shows that it's on. If you would each identify yourselves for the record, and you may proceed.
My name's Curtis Rogers. Billy Simic.
Jeremy Rancic.
Fantastic. We have your presentation up and ready to go, so the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having us. Again, I'm Curtis Rogers, board member of the Red River Gorge Climbers Coalition. Thank you, Senator Wise, for having us. And before, I have to say one quick thing. Representative Timoney was my government teacher in high school, so we've come full circle. So
roll call.
I thought that was kind of fun. He taught me about government, and now we're here. So
Fantastic.
I wanted to say that. And he's not that much older than I am. Before you give him old jokes.
Great.
So we are from the Red River Gorge Climbers Coalition, and today we want to talk about Kentucky's recreational use statute. But before we do that, we'll give you some information, the background on the gorge, background on us a little bit, and then we want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions. Also, I want to point out that if you have any questions during any of this, please feel free to stop us. It doesn't have to be. If something piques your interest, we can stop and talk about it. So here we go. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the Red River Gorge at this point. It is probably one of our biggest tourism destinations in Kentucky. What you might not be familiar with as much is the impact that the Red River Gorge has on the climbing world. And that is kind of the world that we live in. All these pictures you'll see here are from the Red River Gorge. So it is a world-famous climbing destination. The last couple of times that I've been out climbing, I was with a group I met a group from Germany, and I met a group from Portugal, and that is not uncommon. So the Red River Gorge isn't just attracting people for the arches and the off-roading. It truly is this world-renowned place in rock climbing. Another side story, I was in Switzerland with my family on vacation one time. My son's walking around, bumps into an Irish lady. She starts a conversation. She says, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, "We're from Kentucky." And she said, "Oh, like the Red River Gorge?" And I said, "Yes." And she was photographing the indoor World Cup of climbing was going on. And she knew that little section of Eastern Kentucky solely from the climbing world. So again, we're all familiar with how important it is to Kentucky. I've been going there since I was 4 years old. We all know Miguel's Pizza. We all know the off-roading, hunting, the cabins. But it is truly a world-class destination for rock climbing. About 102,000 climber-specific visits happen each year. That was in 2020. I would expect that number is higher, and we'll go over the economic impact study that has some of those numbers later on. A large portion of the Midwest, East, the South, they all consider the Red River Gorge their home crag. And what the home crag means is if you're talking to a climber and you say, "Hey, such and such is my home crag," they're talking about the area outside closest to them where they go climbing. So obviously anybody in Kentucky is going to call the Red River Gorge their home crag. People in Ohio, in Indiana, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Michigan, the entire Midwest for the most part. There's not a ton of climbing north of us, and the entire Midwest considers the Red River Gorge their home crag. So it's pretty common for somebody to leave Friday night, wake up early Saturday morning, drive 5-6 hours, spend the weekend climbing, and go home. So it's a huge importance in the world. It's a huge importance in the Midwest, and it is truly one of the most important climbing areas in the world. International visits are common, like we said, and then also remote work. In the past 3 or 4 years, we're seeing a lot of climbers moving to Lee County, Wolfe County, Powell County. Estill County is growing now too, and some of that, to live or at least have second homes where they're living on the weekends. And that threw in that last quote, God must be a climber. I mean, just look at the Red River Gorge, and that's from Outside Magazine in 2019. And in that article, they said that the Red River Gorge is the 4th best climbing destination in America, and that includes places like Yosemite and the places that you've all known. So again, I really want to drive home that point that as much as we all know it, if there's a climber in the world, they're familiar with the Red River Gorge, no matter where you are. So who are we? The Climbing Coalition is dedicated to securing and protecting open and public access to rock climbing. The history of it is in 1996, there were some areas that were threatened to be shut down on Forest Service land. The Forest Service was going to shut down some climbing areas due to archaeological and ecological impacts in a certain area. And so at that point in time, almost all the climbing was in national forest land. And so our organization, we weren't there at the time, but the founders of our organization said, well, if we own the land, then it can't be closed. So the organization started buying up large tracts of land specifically for rock climbing. So you see in 2004, we purchased 750 acres. In 2012, we purchased another 309. And then in 2017, 102 more acres. So our organization's goal is to make sure no matter what happens on a federal level, if the federal government were to shut down national forests for rock climbing forever, we would still have places to recreate and to climb. And we keep all of our land open. There's no fees. If you want to go take a hike on our property, you're allowed to do that. It doesn't have to just be for climbing. But a core tenet of our organization is keeping the land open. So there's basically 5 more or less types of land that we climb on. And if you can see this map, I should note that all the slides are printed in the back of the booklet that you have. And if you have a black and white one, I apologize. I used every scrap of red ink in my office to print these, so hopefully nobody from my office is watching. So yeah, the types of climbing access, there's federal land. And in Kentucky, that basically comes down to owned by the Daniel Boone National Forest, the Forest Service, or run by the Forest Service. And that's everything in green. The state-owned land is Natural Bridge State Park. You're not allowed to climb there at all. Forest Service land you are allowed to climb on. You just can't bolt new routes, which means put these, reach over Billy here, in the rock. We're no longer allowed to do that. And then there's LCO-owned land. LCOs are local climbing organizations. That's us. So everything you see in red in the southern area, that is land that we own. That's our 1,000 acres. And there's privately held land that's open to the public. You might be able to see that purple area called Graining Fork. It's privately held. You have to have a pass. You don't pay for that pass. You just get a pass, and that's a private landowner who allows people to climb. There's other places. There's another place called Torrent that's not open to the public all the time, but you can get a pass and permission to climb on. And then there's privately held land that's closed to the public, and that's really going to be the crux of what we're discussing here. So it's a little different in the east. If you're talking to climbers out west, it's almost all of it is owned by some type of federal agency. For us, land ownership becomes a much more complex topic. So that puts us into the recreational use statutes. I've done a lot of research on recreational use statutes in the past couple of weeks, and I'll just give you a quick overview of that. Basically, post-World War II, the government was concerned that American citizens were becoming too obese and that there was not enough land for us to recreate on. And so as a response to that, in 1965, the Council on State Governments said, hey, we need to come up with a statute that is going to allow people to recreate on privately held land. That's going to eliminate or reduce the amount of liability that a landowner would have if somebody were on his or her land. So the Council of State Governments, they created a model statute in 1965. Kentucky adopted ours in 1966. And I've put several copies of different states' statutes in the back of the book. You'll notice that the language is very similar, and that's because it was just more or less copied and pasted and altered throughout the history. All 50 states do have one. All of them have some variation of form that protects landowners when they allow somebody to recreate on their land. And probably the thing that we're all most familiar with is hunting. We know plenty of farmers throughout Kentucky that say, hey, I own 100 acres in Woodford County. If you want to hunt on that, you're more than welcome to do so. And there was even a Supreme Court case last year on that where a hunter was on somebody's land, a tree stand failed, and he sued. The landowner was covered by the recreational use statute because it says, if I allow you to come onto my land and you get hurt, then I'm not held liable. Most of the statutes say some version of the landowner owes no duty of care to keep the premises safe or to provide a warning of danger. The statutes don't apply when the landowner charges a fee. So if I say, hey, for $50 you can hunt on my property, well then I no longer am covered by this recreational use statute. It also doesn't cover instances of malicious intent. There was a case in Maryland where a biker was riding in a public park and she hit a gap in the brick and sued. And originally it was said, no, well, we're covered by the recreational use statute. And two reasons. One reason was she was commuting, so it wasn't recreation, they said. But the other reason was there was documented cases that the city knew that this 2-inch gap existed. I think it was 2-foot gap, excuse me. It was a 2-foot gap. They knew it existed. They were told to fix it, and they just didn't. So then the malicious intent came in. And then each state has its own list of recreational activities that are specifically mentioned. And they also have different definitions of land. So you can kind of see the variations from that 1965 statute. And so that's a quick overview of recreational use statutes. I will say the National Ag Law Center has a map of the U.S., and I think the link is in the slides, and it'll allow you just to click on any state and it'll show you their current recreational use statute. So our proposal is that we would like to have rock climbing specifically mentioned in Kentucky's recreational use statute. We would like it to be amended to include rock climbing, bouldering, and rappelling, and we would propose that the definition of land actually be expanded to include boulders, rocks, and cliffs. And in your packet that you have, I've given you a copy of our current recreational use statute and then an amended one, which would be some type of sample of how we think that should look. It's modeled off of the West Virginia state recreational use statute, which was amended last year by an organization called the Access Fund, which we work with closely, and there's a letter of support from them in your packet as well. So these are the states where climbing is specifically mentioned. Almost every state in America has hunting. Your coastal states cover water sports specifically. Your northeastern states cover stuff like berry picking and firewood collecting. Colorado specifically mentions kite flying, so I'm not sure why, but they specifically protect kite flying and climbing as well. And my favorite so far that I've seen is that Louisiana specifically covers snowmobiling in their recreational use statute. Not sure why. But these are the states that, the list here are the states that specifically cover climbing. You'll notice that Virginia, Tennessee, West Virginia, all neighboring states of ours that explicitly mention climbing and rocks in their recreational use statutes. And again, the draft language that we put in the booklet is modeled off of that West Virginia statute. So again here, our definition of land in our current recreational use statute is the stock material from 1965. We would like it to include rocks, boulders, and cliffs, specifically mentioning rock climbing, bouldering, and rappelling as protected activities. Will allow landowners to feel more at ease when we approach them and say, hey, can we climb on your land? And then, the easiest way to think of this is to specifically include rock climbing similar to that hunting relationship that we all know. If somebody in Estill County wants to go hunting on somebody's property, they allow it because they're covered by the statute. If somebody wants to go rock climbing in Menifee County or Powell County or Wolfe County or Lee County on a private landowner's land, we would like to see that work in very much the same way. Okay, so last slide here, I believe it's why should we amend it? And we've already talked about the importance of the Red River Gorge to rock climbing. I should note that the Red River Gorge is not the only place in Kentucky where you can climb. It is the most famous and by far the most important and the highest concentration of climbs. There are other areas here in our state where people do climb. So that is something of note. The gorge is the premier climbing destination in the world. Visitors come from all over the world, like I've said. Climbing has a huge economic impact on the area. This infographic is from an economic impact study that Dr. Maples, James Maples from EKU, he's no longer with EKU, but at the time we had him do this study in 2016 and 2020, and I've put an entire copy of that in your booklet. In 2020, he said that there's $8.7 million spent annually, specifically in the Red River Gorge on climbing, and that was up from $3 million in 2016. So if it grows at a similar pattern, we're looking at over $20 million by 2024, 2025. And I think there's reason to believe that rock climbing has actually been growing exponentially, not linearly, because of some famous films and just the prevalence of the sport. It's now in the Olympics. This will be the second year that it's in the Olympics. So it is becoming more and more known. So climbing is in a tremendous period of growth. And then, lastly, the land prices, as I'm sure you know, have skyrocketed in this area of Kentucky. We own 1,000 acres. Jeremy leads our access and acquisitions committee, so he's constantly talking to landowners, trying to acquire more land for preservation and rock climbing. It's becoming a lot more expensive than it used to be. So what we've seen a lot of, and Jeremy also works with cabin developers, where if a cabin development goes in, they're usually on cliffs where rock climbing is great, where we can climb all day long. So a guy might buy 500 acres of land and start a cabin development. Well, just because that person owns it doesn't mean that we can't climb there. And if we came to him and said, hey, this statute specifically covers you in the case of an injury, the recreational use statute, then these private landowners might be more open to allowing us to climb on their property. And that kind of is the crux of the issue for us. There are unbelievable climbing opportunities throughout the Red River Gorge. Many of them are on private land, and we're seeing more people being willing to allow climbers to climb on them. There's always a little hesitancy to, hey, what if you get hurt? And so that's really what we're trying to cover here with these proposed changes. And that's all we have. We've got some time for some questions.
Curtis, I just want to first thank all of you all for presenting for the first time. Everything you've brought here before us is truly appreciated. And members, I just want you to take note once again of the handout that's in your folders here of all of the intricacies you put in here with the executive summary and everything is very well done. I want to also thank, I think, your couple research team members, Dr. Maples and Dr. Bradley. I think they did work on this. This is really, really good, and especially what we like in the interim. If we go forth, in January of making any statutory revisions and changes, this is phenomenal. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And we can bring Dr. Maples in, as well as teams from the Access Fund who helped with the West Virginia statute.
Talk to me, since this is the first time in front of us, your all's protocols during the COVID-19 pandemic and the what impact that had on you all in terms of sustaining through that. I'd just like to know what was the implications.
Yeah, Curtis, I'll take that one. I was
just pull your microphone, if you would, a little bit closer to you.
I was serving as vice president during COVID, and that was a very challenging time, particularly for organizations like ours, where use of the property is why we're there. We're there to have it open to the public. And in the history of the coalition, we've never closed. We had until COVID, we had never closed our properties, and we had some very strong debates about what was the right thing to do to protect the people who live in the area. And we had a conversation with the judge executive in Lee County at the time, and jointly with them determined that closing our property was the appropriate thing to do at that time. So we had a temporary closure, which was strongly debated at the board level because, open public access is in our mission statement, and then to create a closure was something that we didn't take lightly, but we thought it was the right decision, particularly when we worked with Judge Executive Caudill at the time.
Perfect. We have a few questions from some members. Representative Kulkarni.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for presenting. I love the gorge. I love to hear whenever it gets the international recognition that it's due. I had a question. I think it was Mr. Rogers. You left off with, this is to address if people get hurt. So my question is just logistically, when you're talking about land that's owned, that's privately held, or that's managed by, a organization like yours, we have, I'm assuming, state and federal like rangers that will patrol parks, and if there's a rescue needed, they will have their protocols. What happens or what changes when you're dealing with privately owned land, and who's allowed in and access in case of an emergency?
Yes, so our properties are all on Lee County, but you may have heard of the Wolf County Search and Rescue Team. They were the most prominent. They cover the majority of the Red River Gorge and the Daniel Boone National Forest, and they work very closely with Powell County Search and Rescue. But Lee County Search and Rescue covers all of our properties, and all three of them, and I think Estill has one as well. But they all work together, and they all have really great response teams. And yeah, we have multiple climbers. The land manager of Muir Valley, which is another local climbing organization in the gorge, is on the Wolf County Search and Rescue Team. And yeah, they've received national recognition too. They won a grant from Land Rover a few years ago to get new vehicles, and they have a really excellent team of people who work for them. And like I said, a bunch of climbers on there, so they know the area as well. And we've worked, our kiosks on all of our properties, we worked with Lee County Search and Rescue because they might not necessarily know the area as well as climbers are. And so we work to color code the kiosk, so if somebody does get hurt, they can come down and be like, I'm at the yellow kiosk, and they know exactly where to go. We've also given them rock climbing guidebooks to the area and met with them. And then as Curtis said, as more and more climbers move down there, we've seen more and more join the search and rescue and the fire teams there, which is really helpful for all rescues as well.
I'd like just to add to that, there was an injury recently, let's say the last 6 months, on a private property, and a rescue did happen there, and was it Wolf County? I believe it was the Wolf County team who assisted. So that scenario has happened and was successfully executed, if you will.
I'll throw in one more thing too, just of note. Just last week, we have monthly meetings with the Forest Service. So it's kind of the opposite end of that. There was a climb, or there is a climb on Forest Service land where several people had been injured, and they came to Billy and they said, "Hey, how can we make this safer?" And there's a thing called a permadraw, which we don't have time to explain, but it makes a climb safer. And they've basically commissioned Billy to go in there and fix this climb more or less, so it will be safer for people to climb on, not on our property, but it's Forest Service property. And so they're looking to us to make those things safer. And so we do the same thing on our property whenever we can.
Representative Maddox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question about the proposed changes here in statute, and I certainly can empathize with running out of printer ink, but it appears that the words that you want to change are somewhat lighter, but I just want to clarify. In subsection A of section 1, it's adding rocks, boulders, and cliffs. Is that correct? And then
That is correct.
In C, rock climbing, bouldering, and rappelling.
That is correct.
Very good. Thank you.
Senator Boswell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes. Earlier in the beginning of your press, you mentioned the word. I think you said reduce liability. Now, I want to say that I 100% support Kentucky's law regarding hunting and being on people's property with permission. Just so happens I do own a lot of property, and I have some leased, but I have some property that I do allow people to hunt and fish on. And I'm going to give you an example of a concern I would have. Just recently, I was on my own farm and I fell in a hole up to my waist. I marked it immediately, and the next day I drove 1 hour with my tractor just to cover that hole up. And I'm making a point of this. Once a landowner becomes aware of a situation on his property, that does make him potentially liable. So I would just say that as we proceed with this, and I support what you're doing, I think it's a great idea, that we just be careful not to over emphasize to a landowner that he would have no responsibility. I insure myself. My son's a trial attorney. I insure myself up to the hilt for anything, even if it's leased. It doesn't matter if I allow people to hunt and fish or whatever, because there's always a risk, and I just want to make sure that we remember that, and we need to be sure that landowners, private landowners, know that there could be some risk once they become aware of a hazard.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And it won't ever eliminate, as you know. You're never completely removing risk in any situation. And I'll be interested to hear what our organization, the Access Fund, the interactions they had with West Virginia landowners. That was the most recent one. And we can kind of draw from that experience. But that's a very good point. Thank you.
Representative White.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm well acquainted with what they're talking about. I bought 1,500 acres up there, and I know I built the first cabin that was ever in that area to rent. And people said, "What are you doing building a cabin? There's nobody going to rent a cabin off of you. You got Natural Bridge here, and the lodge and cabins." Well, I couldn't even build them fast enough, and I started a resort there called Cliffview Resort, and I had a few people fall off the cliffs up there. Most of the time, about all the time, is alcohol related, and I think there's only one that ended up dead. But I always encourage people when I owned that. I sold that in 2001, but I always encourage people to come up and take advantage of it, and never would charge and let people climb. And I guess I'm probably lucky I never was sued. Most of the people, well, not most, I only had 2 or 3 just fall on cliffs, but they land on top of a pine tree or something and fall through it, strip the hide off of them, but they lived. But I know what you're talking about, and I'm very acquainted with that, and that is a growing an area. And one of our other representatives here, Mr. Dotson, he's invested in part of that area and putting lodging for people. And I'm all support of whatever we can do for that area. And I loved it. And in fact, I buried one of my small child up there one time. So I'm behind you.
All 3 of us have spent a significant amount of time hiking in Cliffview in that area. So yeah. It's a beautiful property. And unfortunately, you are correct that there are alcohol related. And if you look at the Wolf County Search and Rescue, their social media accounts, it's I don't want to say exclusively that, but it's a lot of times they're rescuing people who were drinking along cliff lines, whether it's hiking or staying at the cabins. But we're very familiar with the Cliffview property.
Yeah. Thank you.
Representative Timoney.
Thank you, Chairman. Committee, gentlemen, thank you for presenting today. This was a very organized, a very well-researched presentation. I wish you well with this moving forward. And just a comment, Mr. Chairman, Curtis, way back 20 years ago, when you had that government teacher as a freshman in high school, and he taught you about the physical geography of Kentucky, would you say that was your genesis moment why you went rock climbing?
It might be the only reason that I'm here, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean,
just want to make sure we give credit where credit's due, Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I would like to point out that he made us do push-ups for every minute we were late to class. So
physical fitness is something that's really, really good strategy for learning material.
I did have my eye on what time you came in, so you're good.
Thank you.
Duly noted. Any other members? Any other questions? Seeing none. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the presentation. Thanks also on behalf of the entire Commonwealth of Kentucky for what you are doing there for tourism and just for families and visitors from all across the United States as well as all across the globe that come to visit you all. And also thank those at Miguel's Pizza for what they're doing to serve all of us as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda today is the Kentucky Historical Society about upcoming programs and events that they are having a part of either locally here or across the Commonwealth. We'll give them time to make their way to the table here. As they get settled here, we'd like to welcome Scott Alvey, Executive Director of the Kentucky Historical Society, Sarah McIntosh, Director of Learning Services with the Society, and also Stuart Sanders, Director of Research and Publications. I know you all are not a stranger to the annex here, but if you would, please follow protocol and introduce yourselves for the record, please, and you may proceed.
Historical Society. Oh. Sorry about that. Stuart Sanders, Kentucky Historical Society.
Sarah McIntosh, Kentucky Historical Society.
Scott, we'll get you just a second here. Scott, just make sure you hit that button on your microphone there.
Thank you much. Sorry about that. Scott Alvey, Executive Director of the Kentucky Historical Society. And while we're kind of waiting for the technology to catch up, let me thank you, Senator Wise, Representative King, Representative Pratt, for having us here today. My colleagues and I always appreciate the opportunity to talk Kentucky history. Unfortunately, we don't have some cool things like the previous presenters brought for you today, but you're all are always welcome to come down to the Thomas D. Clark Center for Kentucky History, the old state capitol of the Military History Museum. I know recognize several faces from previous tours, but we'd always love to have you come down. I'm going to give it just an extra minute here to see if we can get our slides pulled up.
While she's getting that set up, I do want to make members aware, some maybe participants of this. We do have a Kentucky History Caucus that any member of the General Assembly wishes to be a part of. I co-chair that along with Representative Michael Meredith, and we welcome any member on this committee as well as other committees to be a part of that. We recently, this past session, got to go behind the scenes there at the Kentucky History Museum to see artifacts and things that the general public does not get to see. It was like going through a Raiders of the Lost Ark museum. It was really, really cool. So if you wish to be a part of that on the House side, if you would see Tommy Druin, Representative Michael Meredith, or senators on my side, happy to sign anyone up to be a part of that caucus.
If it's okay, I'll go ahead. A lot of the slides that we had were for visual reference only.
Fantastic. Members, you can refer to your packets. I think everything there on the presentation is in your packet.
Great.
There we go.
As
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting for technical difficulties, I could add a little auxiliary information if you'd like.
Fantastic. Please proceed.
Very good. Harrodsburg just completed its 5-year ceremony of turning 250 years old on Sunday. And your organization and many professionals within your all space was a tremendous help to that. And we learned during those activities that several other Kentucky cities are kind of lined up to be celebrating their 250th as well. So Harrodsburg was proud to kick that off statewide, and I just want to publicly thank you all for your efforts and help on that. Thank you. We had a big time.
Great. Hopefully we didn't steal any of Stuart's thunder. I think he was going to give you. No, you're good. You're good. Like I said, we're always excited about sharing all the information and the programs and the activities we do. As I mentioned, I'm privileged to be the executive director of the Kentucky Historical Society. We are a member of the Tourism Arts, or administratively attached to the Tourism Arts and Heritage Cabinet, but I'd like to point out that we are a member organization comprised of over 3,000 members from across the country, across the globe, who are passionate and share our passion for Kentucky history. You know us primarily from our campus locations, the Thomas D. Clark Center for Kentucky History, the Old State Capitol, and the Kentucky Military History Museum. But as Representative King pointed out, we also do a lot of outreach programming. The Markers Program, probably the most visible outreach program that we do. Sarah's going to talk a little bit about a National History Day in Kentucky, a program that we operate. And we also spend a lot of time touring around and visiting with our colleagues that run historical organizations and historical activities in ways that we might be able to support them and also learn from them about the activities that they do. This past year, I wanted to kind of highlight some of the impact numbers that we've encountered. And unfortunately, this slide is already out of date. In the last couple of months, we've seen a really sharp increase in student programming that has maybe finally got back to pre-pandemic levels. Right as we got into the end of May there, it was really fun to walk down to the History Center in the Old State Capitol. You had students everywhere. And now that's transitioned over into our teacher programming. But we also are a collecting organization. We are in the business of saving Kentucky's treasures, Kentucky's historical artifacts. As you mentioned, it's kind of the Raiders of the Lost Ark moment when you get to walk up into collection storage, but also archival storage where we house, and many of you have seen the Kentucky 1792 Constitution, and a lot of other family stories, family history, you name it. We have a wealth of items that are in our archives. And oral histories. I have to mention that Kentucky is proud to have the only state Oral History Commission, which again, its primary purpose is to make sure that we're providing resources to encourage people to capture those stories from veterans to every topic that you can think of covered within Kentucky history. So it's a great piece to have. I'm sorry. I wanted to pause for a little bit because one of the things we're really seen for being that on-site location and have those physical presence, but the pandemic really ramped up our social and outreach engagement, our online engagement. It's not just our social media posts and things like that, and it's not just videos that we did of our programs, but when we made resources available, for example, the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society is our scholarly journal. Once we made that available to researchers for free, removing the paywall for it, we can track, actually as teachers, we're assigning that as readings for their classes. And we've known, and that uptick of use of those kind of resources remain at a strong and steady level. We're also looking at ways that we can transition that kind of access into Kentucky history, into our teacher programs and others. But we have a very active social media following for both our museum functions, our research functions, and our educational functions. As I mentioned, our campus visitation has increased 36% over 2022, and that's also going up. We hit just about every Kentucky county, and we're working really hard to make sure that we're reaching both out to those counties and trying to find ways to draw them into the campus activities that we have in Frankfort. A lot of folks don't think about the economic impact of what museums bring to our economies. The American Alliance of Museums, to which we are accredited by, in their economic impact formula, KHS, we employ 50 employees, actually more now, in Frankfort, with our payroll and benefits being over $4 million. We spend over $2.5 million of our annual budget for goods and services in Frankfort. We serve over 30,000 visitors on the on-site piece, with 69% of them coming from out of town. And we served, again, this number's low, over 11,000 school children through our school visits to the museums. We do have an admission fee that ranges from scholarship programs that allow for free admission all the way up to $8 per person. Our impact on our Frankfort and Kentucky tourism economic impact, on a conservative approach, you can see on the day trippers at a little over 800,000 and our overnight visitors 750,000. I don't think a lot of folks think about our campus location as being that big of a draw, and I think it's a pretty significant element that we are able to bring into downtown Frankfort. I wanted to give a little pitch about museums as economic engines across the country, and this is a slide we share with the Congressional Caucus in D.C. annually. But the number of people who visit museums throughout the country is greater than people who attend all professional sporting events and go to amusement parks combined. It's not even close. So I know that when we look at museums, we see a lot of the big places, Smithsonian's and Guggenheim's and things like that. But when you look at all the other smaller organizations throughout the country, it has a huge impact on what we do. In Kentucky, we have about 350 historical organizations, and you can see that same impact. There's more Kentucky history organizations around the Commonwealth than there are Starbucks. Before I went into some of the most recent programming, I also wanted to talk about that on-site experience that we provide. And again, I know many of you have been there to the building. One of the challenges that we face is our exhibit experiences and the Old State Capitol experience is over 25 years old. The Old State Capitol went through its last major renovation in 1976 in time for the bicentennial. We're coming up on the US 250. And so we received some capital funding to help do some historic preservation and some program planning for that space. We'll be looking to try to do a similar activity with the Thomas D. Clark Center for Kentucky History on the permanent exhibition gallery down there. Again, some of those experiences are 25 years old, and while we try to keep updates on them, we're missing about the last 25 years of Kentucky history within that space. So we're looking to also create spaces that are more attentive to what our modern audience wants to experience. There's very little technology within the exhibits down there, and so we want to make sure that we're bringing ways to access Kentucky history to that space. Most recently, we celebrated Kentucky History Day on June 1st down at the across the campus, the Old State Capitol lawn. If you were in Frankfort that morning, you heard a couple cannons firing off, and we had a big setup of a lot of historical-minded tourism, arts, and heritage agencies on the lawn of the Old State Capitol. This was a big moment for us to not only celebrate Kentucky's 232nd birthday, but to also think about June 7th as Boone Day, a Kentucky Historical Society event that we has gone on for a long time. But how can we bring all these kind of people down into downtown Frankfort and highlight that it's not just Frankfort history, it's Kentucky history that we're able to bring to everyone. We welcomed over 2,500 visitors. This is our first time of doing this kind of version, and we hope to be able to build upon that as well. I got to talking and forgot to advance the slides. Sorry about that. We also hosted a old-time music contest, which was a lot of fun. We know that Kentucky music is a very popular piece for people to delve into, and it's very approachable. We also kicked the day off with the Kentucky History Awards. We had over 140 attendees, and if you're not familiar with the Kentucky History Awards, it is our opportunity to recognize where history is being done throughout the Commonwealth of all organizations. We recognize 18 individuals and organizations that morning, and our hope is that once they're there, they also go out on Kentucky History Day and share those the experiences they have with our general public and with our members that attended that day. Another big program that we recognized then was the Local History Trust Fund. So we oversee the trust fund. It's based upon a state tax checkoff program. The grants are relatively small, anywhere between $290 to $1,000, and where they can implement up to $2,500. I know that those are not big amounts, but those are huge for helping these organizations think about their programming, their artifact conservation and preservation aspects. And one of the pieces that we require as part of that is that recipients enroll in a self-study, that is a self-paced assessment program that's specifically targeted towards them, again, to help them raise and think about their policies and practices that benchmarks them against national organizations. And just kind of a view over the 8 years of where this tax checkoff program has gone. Unfortunately, it hasn't produced what we would like it to produce. I think this past year, our grant funding available for them was $9,000, and we take some of the funding from the Historical Society and help augment that so that we can make sure we get as many grants that have been submitted out there. We also know that if we market the program to the tax checkoff, online filings and things that kind of hidden that tax checkoff element. And so we try to make it very aware to tax preparers that that's an option there for their clients to be able to select. And with that, I'm going to turn the rest of the program over to my colleague, Sarah McIntosh.
Thank you. Again, my name is Sarah Cole McIntosh. I'm the Director of Learning Services. At the Historical Society, that encompasses all of our public programming as well as our K-12 and student teacher programs. So very excited about the upcoming work that we have going on. In January, one of the things that we did is we took an assessment or a survey of Kentucky social studies teachers and asked them specifically, what can we do to help you? Really focusing on professional development, on-site experiences for students, as well as additional materials. So those virtual, digital, and we even have things like traveling trunks that we can send out to the programs. And so wanting to know, what do you need from us to be able to do your job better? And one of the things that came back across the board from grade level, state, geography, everything was spread out, was that folks wanted more Kentucky history and civics education, specifically Kentucky government and Kentucky specific government education for their students, because those materials just don't exist. And so there is no one better in the state prepared to take that on than we are. And so what we have found is that the old state capitol, sometimes referred to as the old state house, is the perfect venue for providing the backdrop for that education, because it is immersive, it is engaging, and frankly, it's a beautiful building. And if you've not been recently, we certainly encourage you to come and visit us. It's currently in a state of 1850s decor, period pieces. And so when the students come in, we're able to explain to them not only what happened, but they have that connection, because Henry Clay stood here, Isaac Shelby walked there. And when you're able to bring that human connection, the stories become real. They're not as disengaged. And that's true of our adult learners as well. And so with that, as Scott mentioned, with the capital projects, when you are able to bring people into that space and they're able to value it and have an emotional connection to that building, they are going to then also be more likely to support your future endeavors of protecting that space. So a few things that we are working on. It's also very exciting. So the civics education pieces, we are coming in with new programming, because that's what the teachers told us that they need. But we're also reviewing and going back to what we are doing and seeing what are we doing well and what can we build on. So we have upcoming speaker series. We're bringing folks in that are going to talk to sometimes teachers, sometimes the general public, but be able to speak to that civics education. And that includes political history. That includes how Kentucky factors into our national history as well as our global history as well, because we know Kentucky is important. It's not a flyover state. And how can we help teachers then take that information and supplement their current curriculum so that they are including Kentucky as part of the main story, not an afterthought, not something to fill space at the end of the day. We want Kentucky history to be at the forefront. In addition to that, we are the state facilitator for the National History Day competition. That is a national competition, national program that some of you may be familiar with. If you're not, the closest thing I can compare it to is a science fair. Students are able to research a topic of their choosing. There are multiple categories, so they can present their research in a number of ways. It can be a dramatic representation, so basically a play or a skit. They can write a research paper. They can produce a documentary. And I'm so excited to share with you that a student from Fayette County Public Schools won first place just last week for nationals for the documentary film that he produced. His name's Jack Gill. And so he's going to be getting, I think, a lot of recognition in his local district for that, but we have been very, very proud to be able to share that information with everyone. In addition, we are partnering with a number of organizations across the state that provide history and civics education. Today, we have 20 teachers down at the Old State Capitol going through trainings. They viewed the 1792 Constitution just a little while before we came over here. And I think they really got excited about that, and they got excited about the doors to Jones Conference Room, which is off of the USS Kentucky, correct? And so, again, bringing folks into that space to help their learning, they then take that learning back to their classrooms and back to their communities. Some of the other things that we're doing, a couple weeks from now, we're going to be partnering with the Kentucky Council for Social Studies and hosting their annual conference. So we'll have educators from all over Kentucky coming into our space. We are also partnering with the Kentucky Civics Education Coalition. And many of you also might be aware that there is a civic seal that students in Kentucky are now going to be able to earn toward their graduation diploma. And so we are coming out with strategies for providing support and activities to help teachers help their students earn those graduation accolades, as well as working with Project Citizen, We the People, which are national organizations and national programs. We are also partnering with the Smithsonian, Teaching American History, and other groups to bring in very high quality training for our teachers. Publicly, we are going to have a July 4th celebration. We are also having in September something we're referring to as Con. So not comics, but Constitutional Convention. And we are going to be focusing on the convention for our state's Constitution. So again, that Kentucky focus that is so important and that our teachers and our public just can't get anywhere else. We also have walking tours focusing on civil rights, women's rights, a variety of topics. We are constantly coming out with new programming, new events. We have Civil War Day coming up. So there's always some kind of learning opportunity taking place on campus. The other thing that I will also point out is that we are developing Kentucky-specific historical, I would call them primary source packets. We know that our state standards for academics are focused very much on primary sources. And so we are doing the legwork for the teachers of pulling those things together by topic and by time period. So we can then also create activities, and the teachers can create them and adapt them to their own classroom needs. So if we pull together a stack of resources on a particular topic, they can tweak that how they need to adapt to their students' reading level or their students' grade level. They can pull all 10 of them, or they can pull 2 of them, depending on how much time they have. But we're trying to do the legwork on that too. And a big piece of that to prep for Stuart's comments are the America 250. And so that is something that we are, again, developing a lot of resources around. We were providing a lot of support, not only in terms of the finished product, but also helping some of the other communities figure out how to bring that local history into their classrooms and giving them the support again, but also the resources they need to be able to make that happen.
Well, thanks, Aaron. Again, thank you all for having us today. I'm Stuart Sanders. I'm Director of Research and Publications at the Kentucky Historical Society. And we're honored to be the administrators of the Kentucky Sesquicentennial Commission that's celebrating the 250 years of history since the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And one of the key pillars of that commemoration is heritage tourism. And so we're happy to be here today before this committee. As Representative King mentioned, we've already started working with communities around the state, including Harrodsburg, and their great commemoration celebrating their 250 years. Some of the projects we did recently is we assisted organizations there. We hosted a large history day at the Mercer County Public Library that educated more than 200 middle school students. We had speakers throughout the day. We also brought in Kentucky's original 1792 Constitution, which I know a number of you all have seen before, and that was a great event. We also provided $10,000 grants to 5 organizations that do history in Mercer County, including the local library, the James Herod Trust, the Harrodsburg Historical Society, Old Fort Herod State Park, and then also a new African-American history museum that has just started in downtown Harrodsburg as well. And we're very excited to help those organizations. And those funds will go toward not only commemorating Harrodsburg-specific history, but also helping those organizations prepare for the 1776 commemoration in 2026. We also gave the Mercer County Public Library a panel exhibit that they can use throughout the community that talks about Harrodsburg's early history. And then we added a Mercer County tour to our Explore KY History smart smartphone app that's based on our historical markers. It's going to drive more visitors to Mercer County, which we're really excited about. As I mentioned, heritage tourism will play a large part in the upcoming America 250, and we're generously provided funds by the General Assembly for that commemoration, which we deeply appreciate. And most of that money is going to be re-granted out to communities to help them with events. I'm sorry. Oh, was that? Oh, that's great. But the grants will be used by communities to help them commemorate the 250 years of history in their communities. We're very excited about that. So we'll go toward libraries, tourism agencies, and CVBs, and other museums and local history organizations to help them prepare for that great commemoration. We're also working with the Kentucky Tourism Cabinet on a new African American heritage trail that the state's putting together to pull together organizations and sites across the Commonwealth. And then, again, we're seeing the 250 as just being a wonderful opportunity to bring visitors into Kentucky who can understand our unique history from not only 1776, but the 250 years of the Commonwealth's important history since that time. So we're extremely excited about that. Another way that we look at heritage tourism is through our historical marker program. I know all of you are familiar with the metal signs across the Commonwealth, and we have now more than 2,500 of those markers across Kentucky, and there are several located in every county. And these are really, it's a community-driven initiative where communities sort of tell us what history they want. They apply for markers and have to show a broad range of community support before that marker is installed. And, it's become a good driver for heritage tourism by marking important people and sites and events in our counties through the marker program. And again, by sort of bringing the program into the 21st century through that smartphone app has also been helpful. We have people from across the country who are coming to Kentucky and using Explore KY History to explore all the far corners of our great Commonwealth. So again, thank you for having us here today. And we're excited about the 250th and really see it being a wonderful boon for heritage tourism across Kentucky.
Thank you all so much for the presentation. Fantastic. And also on behalf of the legislators, I want to thank you all when we do the legislative day at the That's not easy to pull off. Thank you for those of us that got to participate in that. And like you mentioned, Sarah, to be a visual participant and to be active participant in that, it makes all the difference. And what you're doing for civics education is truly, truly appreciated by those of us here in the General Assembly and the work you do across the Commonwealth. Any questions, any comments from any of our members from the presentation today? Seeing none. Thank you all so much for the presentation.
Thank you all very much for having us.
Members, that's all we have for the agenda for today. Do we have a motion for adjournment? Motion. Thank you. So moved.